wildlife conservation in Africa, particularly in Nigeria. I have joining me Andrew Don. He is the country director of Wildlife Conservation Society Nigeria. Thank you very much, Andrew, for joining us.
Hi there, good evening.
Good evening. And we have a lot to talk about. We'll also talk about, I'll tell people now that a butterfly was named after you. So we'll talk about this later on the show, but at least they would have an idea of what we're going to talk about later on the show. So thank you for joining me. Nigeria has been described as a country with unique biodiversity, like a biodiversity hotspot. Help us understand this, because you've worked in Africa since 1989. That's a pretty long time. Tell us about Nigeria's ecosystem and what makes it unique.
Yes, 1989. It's a long time ago. It's half of my life, most of my life.
We can't see your face clearly. We can see the side of your face.
Sorry. Yes. Is that better?
No, we can't see you still. Just
That's
yes,
better.
Much better. Thank you.
Sorry, yes, I'll have to not fidget. So yes, so Nigeria is a biodiversity hotspot. It's perhaps not widely recognized as such, and comes as a surprise to many people who, when they think of Africa's biodiversity, they think of Kenya or Tanzania or Southern Africa. But it's true, Nigeria has more biodiversity measured in the number of species, the number of butterflies and birds and amphibians, not just the large furry animals like lions and elephants that we associate readily with Africa. So why is Nigeria a biodiversity hotspot? It goes back to prehistoric times, during glacial ice ages. So in previous ice ages, there were small pockets of forest remaining in one or two places in Africa where the climate became colder and drier, and forest disappeared from much of Africa, but in small pockets it remained, and there was a small pocket of forest remained in the area in Nigeria and Cameroon. So that area allowed species to survive and to diversify. So today there are certain areas in Africa that have got higher levels of biodiversity than others because they've been permanently forested. Other areas have the forest has come and gone. But in certain areas in Nigeria and Cameroon border, there's always been forest there. Another area is the Albertine Rift in Tanzania and Uganda. So yes, Nigeria's got very high levels of butterflies, frogs, other amphibians, snakes. But it's also got charismatic species such as the Cross River gorilla, and lion and elephant, and those are the species. So I work for the New York Zoo, Bronx Zoo, and the species we focus on are yes, lions, gorillas, and elephants.
So that's what makes Nigeria very unique. And also in your work, we know Nigeria so far has lost about 70% of its forest. And that's a sad reality. Give us a sense of how much you've lost and why have we lost so much forest? We know about construction, all of that. How bad is the situation?
It's pretty bad. I think one estimate is that Nigeria has the highest deforestation rate in the world and anywhere. Yes, and originally the southern half of Nigeria, the wet southern half on the Atlantic border in the Atlantic Ocean would have been all rainforest. And then as you go further north, it becomes drier, savanna, and then you get right in the north, in the far north of Nigeria, which is on the edge of the desert. Yes, there's very little forest left, and most of that forest now is in forest reserves and national parks. The main cause of deforestation, the forest loss, is farming. Nigeria, although it's a rich country by African standards, but there's still very high levels of poverty, comparable anywhere. and most Nigerians are small-scale subsistence farmers, and farmers often clear patches of forest every year to plant new crops. And that's the main driver of deforestation. There are other factors, logging and commercial plantations of oil palm and rubber. But the primary cause of deforestation is small-scale agriculture.
Logging is a huge problem. Logging's a huge problem.
Logging's a huge problem, yes, particularly logging for export. So there's big trade in rosewood and ebony. The rosewood's going to China and Vietnam, but ebony as well going to, probably a lot of it going to the US for seems to be an important part of for furniture and even for musical instruments, guitars. So we're losing a lot of ebony and rosewood.
But in your thoughts, do you think the Nigerian government is really tackling this problem, this, exploitation of the forest and for export outside Nigeria?
No, the Nigerian government's got a number of problems, and I think wildlife conservation or forest conservation is not high up on the agenda. So unfortunately, it's often left to NGOs. Yes, there are other priorities for the government and scarce funds available for conservation. So it doesn't get the emphasis it would get in other countries where perhaps there's a link between tourism and biodiversity conservation. So the government can see that biodiversity conservation is worth investing in. In Nigeria, we don't get much tourism, so I think the government doesn't see a return for their investment. So it doesn't get much attention. No.
Yeah, biodiversity is totally different from oil, and that's exactly why it's not getting so much attention. Andrew, I would love for you to please tilt. Sometimes we just get to see just your headphones. So if you just stay the way you are right now,
Okay.
It's perfect. No, we can't see you anymore. You've gone too far now.
Oh dear, it's very technical.
Yeah, it's tricky. Yeah, just tilt to your left. It's better, and in your work, talking about conservation, and the world came up with a mechanism called Red Plus, where forest communities. I can't see you anymore. I can't see you anymore. But forest communities are asked to protect their forest. But some environmentalists have said that this is not a sustainable solution, where you ask people not to cut down their forests for food or for medicine, to conserve it for a country far away, to be able to meet their own energy needs, or to be able to meet their nationally determined contributions. That doesn't work. That's not fair to forest communities. What would you say?
Yes, I mean, RED is still a new tool for forest conservation and for tackling climate change, but I think it does offer hope for the future. Certainly, Nigeria has food needs. It's a big importer of food, so it has to produce food. It also has timber needs and fuel needs. So people do need to use the forest, but they need to use the forest in a sustainable way. And climate change is starting to affect Nigeria, and people are starting to realize that. And we can't continue to cut down our forest as before. There's more flooding. The rains each year are more erratic and less predictable. Farmers are finding it difficult to know exactly when to plant crops. And given that so much of Nigeria depends directly on agriculture, it's becoming a growing problem.
So what is the role of communities? I've been to Cross River State. I've been to Calabar. I've been to a conservation project where we saw community effort. They're part of these projects. They see it as their own. what is the role of communities? Because they are also, the hunters are also in the communities. Those who
Yeah.
need the firewood, they're also in this community.
Yeah.
So how do you balance this to tell them, yes, you have to eat, you have to eat, but you don't have to eat everything. You don't have to cut down everything.
Yeah.
But people are hungry as well.
Yes. That's the tricky question. So in a country like Nigeria, where, as I said, so much poverty and a population of 200 million, already there's not a lot of wildlife left, and what little wildlife left is found in national parks. But if you don't find ways to involve local people, the wildlife won't last in the long term. The threats will just grow and grow and grow. So it needs, conservation needs support of local communities. So in Cross River National Park, Cross River State that you're talking about, we're working with farmers around Cross River National Park, particularly with cocoa farmers, to try and improve their levels of income on existing farms. So to reduce levels of poverty and encourage support for wildlife conservation, but also reduce rates of forest loss. So make existing farms, intensify production on existing farms, and reduce the incentive to create new farms.
So that's how your project works in the communities where you are.
That's one of the approaches. Yes, cocoa is the main source of income for farmers in Cross River State. So yes, we're focusing on cocoa. We're also working with women's groups around the national park to try and improve production of bush mango, ogbono, which is a very which is a delicacy in Nigeria used for soup. And it's very important, and that's found in the forest, but you can also domesticate that on local farms or even within compounds. So we're encouraging local women to plant bush mango on their farms and in their compounds, which reduces the need to go in the forest and cut it down from the forest.
And the women really play a huge role. Women are affected by climate change. They're affected by environmental issues. How critical is the role of women in conservation?
Massive, really, yes, and it's been overlooked rather, and perhaps undervalued. So yes, we're trying to work with women's groups. Yes, the women are the ones controlling the trade in bushmeat, although it's men going out to hunt, but the sale of bushmeat in rural communities and in urban centres like Calabar is controlled by women. So trying to work with women to reduce the incidence of protected species for bushmeat. So we're not saying that bushmeat is all bad, but some species should not be hunted. And bushmeat, of course, has become a much more topical issue now with coronavirus.
Protected species, is that very easy for them to understand? I mean, a lot of Nigerians, even the educated ones, they have a little idea of what these species are. You tell us the ones that are protected in Nigeria and how hard or easy it is for you to convince a local woman, for example, in Boki, not to eat bushmeat or not to sell bushmeat.
It's certainly a difficult concept to grasp. Yeah, so protected species are the species that are more rare and are slower to breed, so at greater risk of extinction. That will be primates, all primates, monkeys, great apes, elephants, gorillas, chimpanzees. And then the non-protected species are the animals that would breed more quickly, and that's rodents such as cutting grass and porcupines, at less risk of extinction.
Pangolins are very threatened, and Nigeria exports, the highest amount of pangolin skills.
Yeah.
What has your work around conserving pangolins been like?
Yes, yeah. I mean, staggering amounts of pangolin scales are exported from Nigeria, but it's likely that those pangolin scales are being imported into Nigeria illegally from surrounding countries, Cameroon and Congo and Gabon. There's a big trade of pangolin scales into Nigeria, and which are then exported out mainly through Lagos to China and Vietnam. So our focus is try and protect pangolins in the wild, so providing support to areas such as Cross River National Park to make ranger patrols more effective, providing training and field equipment and research to make sure that patrols are targeting the right areas.
Talking about protected areas and the national parks, we know environmental journalists are threatened, but even more threatened are those who are out there, physically trying to save these animals. Tell us about your experience working with them, and do they understand the importance of their work? I've met some of those who work in conservation sites, and they're really quite passionate. I met a young man who has decided to live in the forest in Cross River State. He's a young man, but decided to live in the forest, and that's a lot of passion. It takes so much passion to do that. So tell us about these young men and women who you see every day fighting hard, maybe just to make a living, but fighting hard to help with conservation efforts.
Yeah, it's true. When Nigerian youth have been in the news recently, leading protests for political change in Nigeria, which is good to see. But Nigerian youth have also been leading conservation efforts and climate change efforts in Nigeria. So, I've worked in Nigeria for a long time, and when I started out, it was rare to meet Nigerians that were as passionate as I was, as my organization was, about wildlife conservation. But now it's much more common, and I see hope for the future in Nigeria with the young people who are passionate that Nigeria's wildlife should not be allowed to go extinct, that Nigeria's forests have to survive. So yes, we have a lot of passionate young people coming up, young conservation leaders for the future. But yes, conservation can be a dangerous business in Nigeria, and I think it was last month, very, very recently, 2 national park rangers were killed in Kainji Lake National Park. That's on the western side of the country. So I think killed by armed robbers. So unfortunately, national parks are often havens of insecurity. So, and I think everybody's heard of Sambisa Game Reserve in the northeast being a hideout for Boko Haram, but there are other forests in Nigeria that are also havens for armed robbers, unfortunately, kidnappers.
Yeah, and we're not really quite aware of this.
Yes, no, exactly. I mean, any large area that's unpopulated, it is often can be a centre for illegal activity because they're not well monitored, not well protected by government. So which is another reason why we've got to strengthen our protection of national parks. Both to provide security for animals, but also to improve security for surrounding communities.
I'll take you back to the question I asked about trying to convince a local woman or man not to eat bushmeat, which is very common in Nigeria. During a trip to Buki, on the way, you find civets and different exotic animals on display. I even saw them in people's pots, and you would just buy 1 spoon for 50 naira and 100 naira. It's pretty cheap, and they have no understanding of what exactly they are doing. And when I try to talk to some of them, they say they have to make a living. In your work, do you have any particular story that resonates with you, where you've been out there and spoken to someone? What was the person's response to you?
Yeah, bushmeat's a very emotive subject. what I always think about when bushmeat, I think about my own daughters. My own daughters are huge bushmeat fans, and when they're now living in the UK, but we lived for many years together in Nigeria, and one of the main things they miss is bushmeat, which always surprised me. So there is that strong association for bushmeat, but it's often driven by demand by relatively rich Nigerians, and in urban centres like Calabar and Lagos. At the village level, and places like Afi and Boki that you're talking about, it's surprising to note that one of the most common or the cheapest source of protein in rural areas like that now is ice fish, which is imported mackerel from Europe, and that's often what people in rural areas are eating. And bushmeat is not a common source of protein in the village. It's a common source of income. So hunters are going out to hunt animals, which are then sold. So the hunter uses the animals as a source of income to pay school fees or medical bills. But it in a rural area, people can't afford bushmeat. The bushmeat is hunted in a forest area, but then exported for sale in urban areas, or even to Europe. There's lots of bushmeat sold in London, for example.
So it's going to be hard in your opinion.
It is hard, but what you can do is providing an alternative source of income. So I think it's the income rather than replacing the protein. There are alternative sources of protein available now. There are chickens, cows, fish. But to replace bushmeat hunting, you have to provide an alternative source of income. So we've been working with hunters, promoting beekeeping, cocoa farming, which I talked about. In some communities, we've provided goats to hunters again as an alternative source of livelihood. Various options, and some of the options are working and some are not.
Tell us about the ones that are working. I know that bees are also threatened right now. Bees are threatened. Tell us about the ones that are working and the ones that are really not working.
Some of the ones that didn't work very well is as giant snails. So snail farming. It was quite difficult for people to a very new technology. So although the snails breed quite rapidly and you get large numbers of snails, and it doesn't need a big amount of investment. You can make a small little pen or shed in your compound, and you feed the snails leaves from your farm, cassava leaf, pawpaw leaf, things like that. They do quite well. But then the snails, each dry season in Northern Cross River State, it's got quite a pronounced dry season. The snails hibernate. And I think a lot of the farmers or hunters thought all the snails were dead and threw them away. So that was a difficult misconception to overcome. So that was less successful. The most successful intervention have been where we're building on existing initiatives. So not something new like beekeeping, although that's worked in some communities with some farmers, but not with all. The more successful intervention has been building on existing activities such as cocoa. So trying to make cocoa more sustainable. The existing practices cut down forest and use a lot of pesticides. So the WSS approach now is to try and make cocoa production more sustainable, more profitable, less damaging for the environment. That's been in my opinion, a more successful intervention.
Okay. Well, I just have a few more questions to ask you before we end. A butterfly was named after you. Tell us about that. How did this happen?
A very small, brown, rather ugly butterfly, I have to admit.
Ugly butterfly.
Nothing very beautiful. But again, I mean, it is a huge honor. But Nigeria, I think, has one of the largest number of butterflies in Africa. So just Cross River State alone, I think, has something like 10,000 butterflies. So it's huge amounts of biodiversity, and species are being discovered all of the time. And there's relatively few specialists available who can describe and name these very small animals. Often, even just with butterflies, and it needs microscopes and looking at the genitalia of butterflies, and then they're looking at genitalia and working out if it's new species or not. So yes, I was honored to have a butterfly named after me. I think a butterfly from Kaduna, where I've not actually visited, but very welcome.
Really?
I believe so. Kaduna, yes.
You've not been to Kaduna after several years in Nigeria, over 20 years in Nigeria.
Very limited. My focus has always been, yes, Bauchi State and Cross River State, and Taraba and Adamawa. So yes, I've been in Nigeria a long time, but there is still large. It's a big country. Large areas I've not been to.
I'd like to just say hello to those who have joined us before we continue. I have Pablo joined in. I have Authentic Chi. Those have commented. Lots of people watching on Facebook and on Twitter. Thank you so much, Peter, and all the others who have joined in. So I'll take you now to your country, the United States, and the elections in the US. It has been described as a climate showdown. We have two people from the opposing views, when it comes to climate change, President Trump and Joe Biden. What is your assessment of the elections?
You're asking me?
Absolutely.
Oh, it's not my country, actually. I'm British, but I can still comment.
Yeah.
I can still comment because it affects everybody. I have to be careful. I don't want to be political, but yes, I was overjoyed to hear that President-elect Biden has appointed a climate change advisor, and the US are going to rejoin the Paris Agreement. It's so important because, not just now, but historically, the world has looked, rightly or wrongly, to America to be the leader of the democratic world, and perhaps that leadership hasn't been there recently. So yes, I'm very happy, and I hope it's resolved soon, and we get that leadership back, that strong leadership, which is very important. And we work together. Countries of the world work together, not in isolation. But it affects the UK as well. Brexit is something similar in a way. It's countries trying to be isolated instead of recognizing that we're stronger together. So I'm very happy with what's happened in the US. Although sad that it's still a country very divided, and I hope the new president can start to bring the country back together, and maybe there's some lessons learned for the UK as well. We can copy what's happened in the US.
And you also mentioned the NSAS protests. That's something I've also talked about, on my live broadcasts.
Yeah.
How did you feel when you heard that Nigerian youths are out there protesting day and night for several days and almost weeks, and then how this whole thing, quote unquote, ended?
When it started, I was very optimistic and excited and proud because Nigeria is my country as well. I see myself as a Nigerian, and of course, Nigeria we've never been blessed by good government, unfortunately. And often you get frustrated and you want to have more Nigerians complain. And it never seemed to have happened. And when it finally did, and suddenly, yes, I was very encouraged. But then the way it happened and the way it stopped, the way it was, violently put down was very disappointing. We're very sad. But I don't think it's finished. I think.
You don't think it's finished?
No, I think the youth will it might be quiet for a while, but I think it'll come back because none of the issues have been addressed. It's been violently put down, but violence doesn't often work in suppressing a movement that has passion and justice on its side.
Yeah, it's quite emotional for a lot of people because we,
yes,
for me especially, I thought, I mean, this was it. This was the change we've always wanted, and this change, could have ripple effects, to biodiversity, to climate change issues, to conservation.
yes,
Areas that we know that have the government haven't really paid attention to. But I mean,
yeah.
it was sad to see what happened, and we have hopes that the revival actually continues and happens. It's now 30 minutes, so I'll just like to thank you, Andrew, for your time on Harps
Welcome.
News with me. I appreciate you, and keep doing the good work you're doing to conserve, unique biodiversity in Nigeria and across Africa.
Thank you. It's been a
Thank you so
pleasure.
much. Thank you to everyone who watched. I appreciate you. And you can also watch this, if you missed it on YouTube, you can also join in and watch it there. It will be live there. Thank you very much. I am Uguchi. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Thank you. Thanks, guys. Bye.